Okay, this is it's too hot for no air conditioning. Back to the beginning of the semester. Remember, the majority of the material is coming from post midterm. You have to remember the big major points from, the right back to the Celtic people up to the 18th century, 1707, in the formation of the Union. But the majority of the material will be from after the midterm. We did start the semester. Remember that there is a video that talks about 5 major American values. Right now, I'm not going to speak too directly to what's going on in America, but democracy and popular government are being questioned, and 4 to 5 million people protested the anti-King Day. And if anything besides identity and culture about these two nations and their history has been mentioned a lot, it's been kings and queens, and whether they're good or bad and how many of them we've gotten rid of during this semester, I've lost count. So that is one of the fundamental values that was identified at the beginning of the semester, is that a foundational principle of American identity and cultural values is the idea of popular government. Right now, people are expressing the idea that their leadership is unpopular, and they're expressing it through mass protests. The numbers are something or close to 5 million people across the entire United States, which would make it the largest protest in American history. I said I wasn't going to talk too much about contemporary stuff because it's too fresh, but it's just too relevant also. So the whole last 100 years, because the American century really doesn't start until that big event we talked about called World War II, which really was just a sequel to World War I, right? World War II was just part 2 of World War I. That's why we call it that. To a certain extent, it was a very long pause, about a generation, so that the experienced soldiers and officers from the First World War that were in some of them were in combat. They became the leaders of the Second World War. So people like Winston Churchill, or on the other side, Adolf Hitler, they were involved, on the ground in World War I, and in World War II, they were the political leaders, or they were the military leaders that participated in World War II as well. So the entire culture is traumatized, and yet there's a number of these people that their experience is to avoid it. In some cases, to avoid it as much as possible, but then ultimately, when it happens, to be the people that are leading the charge and giving showing the next generation how to destroy the earth. We're gonna do this American century idea first. Like I said, it's Tim Luce. You may know Time magazine. Magazines are kind of things that we don't see very often, or some people buy them. I mean, people still have this what would you call it? Affinity for touching, for a tactile, experience. It's like buying LPs instead of downloading, streaming music. Some people have. A student today told me one of the things that she collects are LPs, and you play them on a record player, and you do it for a number of reasons. One of them is people sometimes like physical stuff, and that physical, tactile aspect is attractive. So the magazines still exist, but most magazines have disappeared or they've become digital. But Time Magazine was one of the greatest magazines, and they have the person of the year every year. Agree or disagree with what they say, but it was Tim Luce, the founder of that magazine, that coined it the 20th century, right? The American century. Now, he didn't do this until World War II in the 1940s, so half the century was over. So it's hard to say that it was the American century when, the first part of the century wasn't really dominated by America. But certainly from World War II until now, all of us are aware of the cultural influence across the board by the great country, the United States. Their culture has ways of spreading itself through technology and through media and through ideas and through military force, through soft power and hard power that no other country has ever, been able to do. At the end of World War II, the United States, even China, and we think everything is made in China, even China has never reached this point where the United States at the end of World War II was industrially so dominant that half of the industrial production on Earth was in the United States. Now, it's nothing near that anymore, and I don't know if that will ever happen again unless we end up having like super countries, like, I don't know, an Asian Union or something like that, like India and China become one, unified bloc like the EU. But anyway, over half the manufacturing and industrial power in the world was done in the United States. Before World War II, half of all the cars that being driven in the world were in America. So, you got to think about the reasons that we call it the American century is because of, you look at any aspect, and pretty much you can see a cultural dominance across the board. Now, the world is a different place now. America opened up, and part of the reason it became so dominant is because of economic, the spread of economic, and the fact that World War I and World War II, they participated, but America wasn't damaged. Like, you just think about Germany was completely leveled. Japan completely leveled. Korea was a colony for 35 years. These countries had to rebuild everything. Meanwhile, the United States was an industrial powerhouse that took no damage. Like, nothing hit New York City. Not a single bomb, right? None of its cities got bombed. None of the continental American, states got attacked. Pearl Harbor got destroyed, and we can't downplay that. That was a disaster. But after that, the United States is untouched. Japan is nowhere near continental United States. Ballistic missiles don't exist. There's nothing they can do to touch mainland United States, and the United States just keeps getting closer and closer to Japan until they're just dropping bombs 24/7. Okay, so these are just a few of the reasons. You have to read this yourself. You have to read up to what I said, up to and through the Hollywood part where it starts with the American presidency, and I said I'm going to cut that part out of the exam because I think I'm giving you enough new material today for you to go over that will just leave the presidents out of it, especially because the president right now, the issues are very sensitive, so we'll just leave the presidents out of this, and I'll stay away from the political system simply because it's not the best time to talk about it, and it's the end of the semester. So let's just focus on how the 20th century developed, and then for this exam we'll leave the presidential political stuff out of it, because it's a sensitive issue in Korea as well. Okay, so let's keep this focused on the cultural and historical, facts and interpretations, possible interpretations. So, excuse me. Perpetual allergies. So like I said, 1890s really was a low point for the United States because there was a severe depression, and until later, the Great Depression, the 1890s in America was the worst depression in its history. That was the Great Depression until there was a worse one, just like World War One, right? When we call World War One, it was called the Great War until World War II happened, and then World War II was worse. So then it became World War One instead of the Great War. So the Great Depression was in the 1890s, and they were struggling to. It was basically a matter of overproduction. There was new technology allowing the United States to be more productive. Industrially, agriculturally, they were making too much stuff. And actually, this is what's happening to China right now, is China's heading towards a depression because they're just making so much stuff and there's not enough people to buy it, right? You're overproducing, and when you have too many products and not enough demand, the price crashes. So they're just pumping out stuff, and other countries can't compete with it. So, this is the tariff war that's going on right now, is the fact that there's an oversupply, and China needs other people to buy it, but other countries are refusing to buy their excess goods. The same thing happened, and there was also a tariff war in the 1890s, so history's repeating itself. Obviously, some people don't study this class. Otherwise, they wouldn't start doing these tariffs. But the fundamental positive thing about a tariff is to protect your goods, right? So like the British and the Europeans, they don't really want to buy American stuff because they can't compete because American stuff is too cheap. Sound familiar? So what happens though, World War One happens, and then all of a sudden the demand in Europe skyrockets, and the American economy has the capacity that's just sitting there, and they just start pumping out stuff. And Germany, and we talked about this already, we talked about it in pretty much detail, basically their economy just exploded because all of a sudden they had too many customers. Like they had the demand skyrocketed. They needed all kinds of guns, equipment, food, tires, oil, shells, jackets, everything. They were just pumping out stuff, and they could barely make it fast enough. Employment basically went down to zero. Again, you want a modern comparison. Despite the fact that Russia's war is not going very well with Ukraine, the unemployment rate in Russia is essentially zero. They have excess demand. They can't make tanks. They can't make missiles or shields or metal or anything or oil fast enough. They're consuming it faster than they can make it. So, salaries go up. Remember the Black Death? Salaries go up. 0% employment. You're a worker, pay me more, or I'm going to work for somebody else. Even in a country that has kind of not a real democracy, people are still going to have to be paid more, right? In Russia, the people who are in the factories and the soldiers are being paid well. Believe it or not. It's the incentive for them to fight. It's the incentive for them to work harder. Is they're being paid well. That's how they keep it going. Likewise, employment goes from lots of people, 10% of the population, no job, to everybody working by the end of World War One. And the 1920s go pretty well. That's the early optimism there, because there's this like optimism. Stock market's going up and lots of people have money and jobs. Everybody's dancing and smoking. And if you look at videos, you'll see the Roaring '20s, and you'll see all these people doing terrible dancing like I do. I don't know what this is, but they're just dancing around. It looks like everybody's having a good time, but it's the optimism. They get over enthusiastic. Everybody's buying property. Everybody's taking out loans. Everybody's buying stocks. It's raining money. And then in 1929, many things happen, but one of the things is everything's overvalued. All of a sudden, the supply starts to exceed the demand, and the prices have been moving up for years, and they're way out of proportion. Like everything is worth, stocks are worth 5 times what they should be, right? Real estate in Florida is really, really expensive. Hurricane comes through, destroys everything, and then people are like, oh, maybe we shouldn't live in Florida. And like people have spent a lot of money and borrowed a lot of money, buying property and this is 100 years ago. So, disaster emergency, vehicles and control are not nearly as good as now. That hurricane that came through wrecked everything. So all of a sudden, all the property and value in Florida, it drops, through the bottom. And so everybody loses money on that. Agriculture, there's some drought, there's some bad weather. The prices start, there's oversupply, and then there's bad weather, and this combination of having too much stuff and then having trouble growing things causes a whole bunch of farmers to go bankrupt and default. They borrow money from the banks. All of them, run out of money essentially at the same time. The banks then go bankrupt because they need the money. They need the workers and the farmers to pay their loans, and they default. So millions of people can't pay. So some people are walking away from their farms because they can't pay. They just leave their house and leave their farm and just start migrating somewhere else, trying to do something else. And the bank is stuck with abandoned farm that nobody wants. There's no value. So mass bankruptcies, stock market crashes, Black Monday, Black Tuesday, 20% in 2 days. Not 20% on one stock, the whole stock market. That's the New York stock crash of 1929. The London Stock Exchange crashes a month before, and people are like, that's because the British, they don't know what they're doing. But that was a bad sign. When the London Stock Exchange crashed, the New York Stock Exchange did the same thing a month later. Then that caused a brutal depression where unemployment was somewhere close to 25%, maybe 30%. 1 in 3 people were out of work, and many more had temporary work. And that's when the president FDR, which I said would stay out of this, but he became president largely because of that, and he promised that he was going to fix the economy and everything. But his New Deal really just kind of kept things going until World War II happened, right? And World War II caused a massive demand for products and kick-started all the excess, because it's basically there's like half-empty factories and empty farms, and all of a sudden they needed all the food and all the equipment and the technology and products that they could do. They needed to recruit. They ended up with 14 million people in the armed services, one of the biggest militaries of all time. Not as big as the Russian military, which some people say was closer to 20 million. But anyway, a massive army which needed to be supplied. Ships needed to be built. We're talking like they built 75,000 airplanes in World War II, and 100,000 tanks, and hundreds of thousands of vehicles and jeeps and trucks and stuff. Just enormous amount of equipment. Millions and billions of bullets and shells and bombs. So this made, obviously, FDR, since America won the war, was on the winning side at least, and defeated Japan and helped defeat Germany. This carried this liberal consensus where the government worked together. And this is an essential part of a democracy actually working, right? We're watching right now democracy have a lot of problems because what we have is people fighting each other about politics. There's no time to fight about who's corrupt and who did this and who did that last election, and blocking people because they're on the other side, and just doing things for yourself and just for your political career when your country is in danger. So for the 40s and 50s, the Republicans and the Democrats get along mostly, and democracy works the way it should work, the way it worked in ancient Athens when you have a common enemy, and all of a sudden democracy is a more effective type of government because actually people buy into it, right? They see everybody's on the same side. It's a bipartisan government, right? Like they propose a bill for money to build airplanes, and everybody vote. Republicans and Democrats all vote yes. That never happens anymore. Everybody's voting on their own party line. So I said I wasn't going to talk about politics, but that's a basic thing. The liberal consensus meant that the Republicans were voting along with the liberals. The Republicans, many of them voted with the Democrats. And Truman, after FDR died, continued that until he lost to Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a Republican, but he was a very reasonable, moderate Republican. And for the most part, the Democrats supported his bills, mostly because, excuse me, mostly because Eisenhower was a Supreme Commander of NATO. Before that, he was a Supreme Allied Commander in the Western Theater in Europe that was responsible for fighting the Nazi regime in Germany. And you have to respect that record. He won World War II. And then he did 2 terms as a president, and he ended the Korean War. He negotiated the ceasefire that ended the Korean War. So, I mean, Eisenhower is a legend, and he's a Republican, but he was respectful, and he was not. He was a politician, but his primary concern was the improvement and protection of the United States. His primary goal was not to improve his reputation or leave a legacy. His legacy was already crazy. He already won World War II. He's already at the head of NATO. He kind of got demoted. Like when he's president of the United States, he's not there to be, I'm the best president, I'm better than George Washington. He didn't care, right? He's just there to make America improve America. And that's the kind of president that you need, is a president who their object is the national interest and the international interest. The best thing about Eisenhower is he was the supreme commander of the Allies, so he cared about Canada, he cared about Europe, he cared about the British, he cared about the French, right? He cared about rebuilding Germany. He was there. He saw it was destroyed. He saw all the people starving and dying, and he saw all the Germans who didn't want to be Nazis and didn't want to follow Hitler. One of my favorite presidents, so I just have to mention him. But you don't have to read that in the textbook. But I think FDR and the New Deal, okay? I said you didn't have to read it in the textbook, but FDR and the New Deal, you should know that he's the president 4 times from the Great Depression to the end of World War II. And then at the end of the liberal consensus, it does say this in the textbook, Dwight Eisenhower becomes the last president before the civil rights movement explodes and Martin Luther King Jr. And Rosa Parks and Malcolm X and all those other African Americans start a movement for equal rights for lots of people, for different genders, sexualities, for women, for men, equal pay, right? All kinds of things, but primarily the main drivers of it were the leaders that were African American, and they were what they were asking for was segregation, to stop separating black people and white people in society. Despite the fact that slavery was gone for over 100 years, the reality of life as a black American, no matter your background, just simply by what you looked like, meant that you were going to be separated in your education, in your life, in your treatment, at the bank, on the bus, in the hotels, in the bathrooms, everywhere. And that is fundamentally systemic racist policy. And so when did slavery and racism ever? I mean, slavery was gone, but racism continued, and it continues to this day. The civil rights movement made improvements, and there is resistance to some of those things, and there's attempts to try and take away certain women reproductive rights and rights of immigrants and other things like that. But the civil rights movement, I guess I'm just guessing that the biggest protests until yesterday in United States history were in the 1960s and 70s. That's what we're seeing right now. The Nixon era. So history is repeating itself again. The way that it did in the civil rights movement is that massive peaceful protests, right? American being its revolutionary self. That's why we're in this situation right now. As we moved through the 70s, we had Jimmy Carter, and then in the 1980s, a president named Ronald Reagan started this basically conservative government, traditional value government, which was oriented around the family and small government. So he cut taxes on the rich, thinking falsely that this would stimulate business. He cut corporate tax, and that this would benefit everyone. The middle class would also have more money, and that more money in the hands of the rich who know what to do with it would stimulate business and then create more jobs and so on. I don't think it's a terrible idea, actually. It just happens not to be true. Instead, Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy, is sending his girlfriend to space with her friends instead of, paying Amazon workers more and hiring more. Like, they have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. But I have an idea. Build some freaking hospitals and some libraries. Not when you're dying and you start to feel guilty and wonder if you're going to hell. Do it now. Do it now while the people are dying. Don't wait until you're dying to like give your billions of dollars away to people. Like, come on. You've got enough money to to help some people with it. But maybe Ronald Reagan had a little bit more faith in people. I don't know. He was a Hollywood actor, not so different than our current president in a sort of, he was a sort of media personality, like a camera. I'm in front of the camera. I know how to behave and how to persuade people. Charismatic and a good speaker, and obviously he won 2 elections, so persuasive, but his economic policy was a disaster. And now, you know, the whole Elon Musk, Doge, America's, you know, overspending and losing money, like bleeding money, and they're going to run out of money soon. That started in the 1980s. But really, we can't blame Reagan completely, because Americans kept voting for people who did the same thing. And Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump again, all these guys have not fixed the spending problem that Reagan started. You know, balanced budgets, you have to go way back to Eisenhower to see America really bringing in more money than they spend. They are just spending crazy amounts of money, and it can't last forever. And in that, I agree with Elon Musk. I just don't agree about how he tried to do it. But I do think that, you know, money trade products, money, jobs, they are tangible things. And if you don't have them, you can't just pretend that you have them, or you get 1929 all over again. Are we going to have a 2029 crash? If it happens, you know, Professor Sullivan predicted it. Okay, we're riding, even though the economy is bad right now, we're riding a bubble here. There's wars breaking out all over the place. There's economic friction between countries. We're not in a good situation. These things, clearly, what I want you to note for the exam is the early optimism that this Cambridge professor, who's smarter than me, devised, is basically, this is good, bad, crisis, good, bad, crisis, stable. I'm not going to say it's good because I don't agree with it, but really, this is one way of organizing it. Okay, so this is what you need to be able to digest, and you need to be able to explain. Is that this is what the 20th century, the great American century looks like. Things go well in the beginning. There's a big crisis, and then a recovery, World War II victory, government sort of cooperation, a civil rights movement that is a crisis, but it ends up having a positive effect, I think, for most Americans, and then a stable period again going into the 21st century. And where we are now, God knows. I don't. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But mass protests, sort of, I see a crisis coming. But we're into a different century now. But why not start the 21st century with early optimism and 2029 Great Depression? Let's hope that's not what happens. Okay, I think my explanation there has gone long enough. So might end up being 3 parts, as I think I need to explain about Hollywood in a separate video. When I get that done, I'll upload it as soon as I can. But really, I'm explaining these things in detail, in great detail. Read it over in the book, and you will see that basically what I'm saying is reflected in the textbook. So once you listen to me or read the textbook and then listen to me, the two of them should fit together pretty well. Okay, so thank you for listening to round 2. You can expect round 3 probably to arrive by tomorrow morning, if not later tonight. This is not a ton of material. We're just covering the second half of chapter 7, and I'm just making sure everybody's clear because we don't have a personal class before we do the exam. Okay, so thank you for listening, and you can expect one more within the next 24 hours at the latest, but it will be shorter, I promise. Thank you.